All right, so let's take a little trip back in time. Back to 1969.
Okay.
Picture this. We've got a group of visionaries getting together, and they are determined to create a children's show that could actually teach kids,
Mm-hmm.
especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Right.
And they spent 2 years working with experts, really digging into the research to make sure that this show would be effective.
Wow.
That show, of course, was Sesame Street,
Yeah.
which premiered on November 10th of that year.
Wow. 69.
And it got me thinking about how important evidence-based practices are, especially in education.
Yeah, it's fascinating how Sesame Street really set the stage for educational programming that's both engaging and grounded in research
Exactly.
at the same time.
And that commitment to evidence brings us to our deep dive today.
Okay.
Growth mindset.
Ah, growth mindset.
You've probably heard the term, this idea that your abilities can be developed through effort and learning from mistakes.
Yep.
It's become super popular in education.
It has.
But does the research actually back it up? Is it really this magic solution that some claim it to be?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, there's been a ton of buzz around growth mindset,
Right.
but we need to look at what the research actually tells us.
Exactly. And that's why we're diving into a really important meta-analysis by McNamara and Burgoyne, published in Psychological Bulletin.
Okay.
Now, for our listeners who may not be familiar, a meta-analysis combines the results of many studies
Right.
to get a more comprehensive picture.
Makes sense.
This particular one looked at a massive amount of data,
Mm-hmm.
61 studies
Wow.
with over 97,000 students.
That's a lot of data.
Huge. So pre-registered.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So this meta-analysis is particularly strong
Okay.
because it was pre-registered.
I see.
What that means is the researchers laid out exactly how they were going to analyze the data before they even started looking at it.
Oh, this helps to avoid bias, which can be a problem in research, especially when a topic is as trendy as growth mindset.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, so they did their due diligence to make sure this was a solid analysis.
Absolutely.
What did they actually find about growth mindset's impact on academic achievement?
Well, the results were a bit surprising. They found that the overall effect of growth mindset interventions was pretty small. Not exactly what you'd expect with all the hype, right?
That is interesting. So not quite the magic bullet some might have hoped for?
Not necessarily, but it does raise some important questions about how we're approaching education and what really works.
I'm all ears. Tell me more about what McNamara and Burgoyne found. What else jumped out at you?
One of the most interesting things they found was that studies conducted by researchers with financial ties to growth mindset programs tended to show much stronger positive results.
That does make you think it's natural for people to be enthusiastic about their work, but it's important to be aware of potential biases, especially when it comes to research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, there are other meta-analyses out there that have found some positive effects of growth mindset interventions,
Right.
but McNamara and Burgoyne's work is generally considered to be more rigorous
Okay.
because of their strict criteria for including studies in their analysis.
Okay, so it sounds like the jury's still out on whether growth mindset is the be-all and end-all solution for educational challenges.
Right.
But here's what I'm curious about. If the evidence is somewhat mixed, why is this concept so widely accepted? Why does it resonate so strongly with people?
That's a great question, and it gets at the heart of why certain ideas take hold in society. Psychologist Daphne Oyserman talks about growth mindset as a culturally fluent idea.
Okay.
It aligns with our values about hard work, perseverance, and the belief that anyone can achieve anything if they set their mind to it.
Right.
It's a very appealing message.
So it's like a feel-good story that taps into our cultural beliefs. But if growth mindset isn't the silver bullet, what are schools actually doing when they implement these programs? Are they completely off base?
Not necessarily. It turns out that many of the activities and strategies associated with growth mindset are actually just good teaching practices that have been around for ages. Things like building self-esteem, encouraging optimism, focusing on mastery rather than just grades. These are all things good teachers have always done.
So maybe the problem isn't so much the specific strategies themselves, but the idea that we need this new label, this growth mindset brand, to make them effective.
That's a really insightful point, and it connects to another important aspect of this whole discussion. Growth mindset programs often put a lot of emphasis on teaching students about growth mindset, explaining the concept, showing them diagrams of the brain, talking about neuroplasticity.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those lessons. Your brain is like a muscle. You have to exercise it.
Exactly. While understanding how the brain works is certainly valuable, some argue that it's more effective to simply focus on doing the things that support growth regardless of what we call them.
So it's less about talking about growth and more about actually putting those growth-oriented strategies into practice.
Precisely things like helping students develop effective study habits, teaching them how to break down complex tasks into smaller steps, providing feedback that focuses on effort and progress rather than just scores. These are practical strategies that can make a real difference.
This is really empowering for anyone listening who's involved in education, whether you're a teacher, a parent, or even a student yourself. It means you don't necessarily need a fancy program or a bunch of jargon to create a growth-oriented environment. You can start by focusing on those core principles, encouraging effort, celebrating progress, and viewing challenges as opportunities to learn.
I couldn't agree more. It all comes back to creating a supportive learning environment where people feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, and learn from those experiences.
This brings us back to our starting point, Sesame Street. Like those pioneers of children's television, we need to be thoughtful and critical about what we're implementing in education. It's not about jumping on the latest bandwagon, but about looking at the evidence, figuring out what really works, and then putting those strategies into action.
Absolutely. And I'd add that it's not just about what works in general, but what works for each individual. We need to be mindful of individual differences in learning styles, motivations, and goals.
So if growth mindset isn't the one-size-fits-all answer, what are some other questions we should be exploring? What are some avenues that could lead to a deeper understanding of how to support student success?
That's where things get really interesting if we move beyond this idea of a quick fix, a single mindset shift that will solve everything. We can start to have a much more nuanced and meaningful conversation about learning and motivation.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into those nuances. Give us some ideas to ponder. What are some of those more specific questions we should be asking?
Well, for one, I think we really need to consider the role of individual differences.
Yeah.
Some students might thrive in a competitive environment,
Right.
while others might need more collaborative
Mm.
or personalized support.
Yeah.
There's a whole field of research on learning styles, personality, and motivation
Right.
that could inform how we design educational experiences.
Yes, and let's not forget about the importance of creating a sense of belonging and purpose.
Absolutely.
Students are more likely to engage and persist
Yeah.
when they feel connected to their school community and see the relevance of what they're learning to their own lives and aspirations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We also need to think critically about the messages we're sending students about success and failure.
Yeah.
Are we fostering a culture of growth
Mm-hmm.
where mistakes are seen as opportunities for learning?
Right.
Or are we inadvertently reinforcing a fear of failure?
Ooh, that's a big one. I've definitely seen how that fear of failure can paralyze students. It's
Yeah.
like they're so afraid of getting things wrong that they don't even want to try.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
how do we create learning environments
Right.
where it's safe to take risks,
Yeah.
to experiment, to embrace the messy process of learning?
Yeah.
I think that's a question we need to be asking ourselves constantly.
This has been such an insightful deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We started with this seemingly simple question about growth mindset,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really led us to a much broader and more profound conversation about the nature of learning motivation and what it truly means to support student success.
I think so too. And hopefully
Yeah.
it's left our listeners with a sense of empowerment.
Yeah.
They now have the tools to evaluate these programs and ideas more critically,
Right.
and perhaps even some inspiration to spark new approaches in their own learning or teaching journey.
Remember, it's not about finding the one right answer, but about embracing the complexity and the ongoing exploration of what helps us all learn, grow, and thrive.